Of all the children of Finwë, he is justly most renowned, for his valour was as a fire, and yet as steadfast as the hills of stone. Wise he was, and skilled in voice and hand. Troth and justice he loved, and bore goodwill to all, both elves and men, hating Morgoth only. He sought not his own, neither power nor glory, and death was his reward. Fingon the Valiant, High King of the Noldor. This legendary prince is the next figure I will discuss in my series dedicated to heroism throughout the ages of Middle-earth. As always, I will provide a brief background of this figure, his history, fate and importance, and discussing an act of heroism, bravery or courage, and why this Noldoran prince and king more than earns his place alongside other heroes of the First Age. Not for battle prowess or a glorious end, but for his valour, putting others first while risking his own demise in the process. Despite the opening quote counting Fingon as a child of Finwë, a name given to many of his descendants, Fingon is the son of Fingolfin and grandson of Finwë, the latter being the first king of the Noldor, coming to Valinor from Middle-earth alongside the other ambassadors, Ingwe and Elwë, eventually leading the Noldor westward across Middle-earth, the Great Sea, and to Aman itself. Fingon's father, Fingolfin, needs no introduction, as I have already dedicated a video to his heroism, which you can find in the description. As a High King of the Noldor, it is no surprise that the family tree of Fingon is impressive, to say the least. Son of Fingolfin, he is brother to Elven King Turgon the Wise, one Morgoth feared, for of old in Valinor his eye had lighted upon him. As for his name, Fingon may mean Hare Shout or Hare Hero. He is described as having long dark hair in gold braided plaits, and his name, like many descendants of this figure, honours his grandfather Finwë. His father name in Quenya, the name given to an elf near birth by the father, is Findecano, meaning Hare Shout, which is then translated into Sindarin, becoming Fingon. This translation into Sindarin means Fingon can also translate as Hare Prince or Lord. What led Fingon from Valinor to Middle-earth? It was, of course, the flight of the Noldor. After the fallen Vala, Melkor and the spider-shaped monstrosity, Ungoliant, killed the two trees of Valinor, and the Dark Lord murdered Finwë before stealing the Silmarils created by Fingon's uncle Fëanor, many of the Noldor departed Valinor to seek revenge against Melkor, now named Morgoth. Fingon was among them, and even urged his father Fingolfin to come also, marching against his own wisdom to avoid being sundered from his own people. Of like mind with Galadriel was Fingon, Fingolfin's son, being moved also by Fëanor's words, though he loved him little. And with Fingon stood as they ever did, Angrod and Aingnor, sons of Finarfin, but these held their peace and spoke not against their fathers. Fingon led the largest host out of Valinor, and he did take part in the infamous kinslaying at Alqualonda, when Telerin elves were killed by Fëanor and many of his followers to obtain ships to sail east to Middle-earth. Fingon, arriving to aid the vanguard of the Noldor, found his kin failing, rushing in before he knew rightly the cause of the quarrel. We are told that some even believed the Teleri, who had refused to give ships to Fëanor, were in league with the Valar, being told to waylay the march of the Noldor. When Fëanor and his sons seized the ships and departed suddenly, they slipped away secretly, and left Fingolfin in Araman, to the northeast of Aman between the Pelori Mountains and the Great Sea. Yet another act that divided the Noldor further, instigated once again by Fëanor, who years earlier had drawn a sword on Fingolfin in Valinor. When Fëanor finally arrived on the shores of Middle-earth, we get a glimpse of the friendship between Fëanor's son, Maethros, and Fingolfin's son, Fingon. A friendship that would be tested through the actions of the elves in Valinor and Middle-earth, but one Fingon would remember and honour. But when they were landed, Maethros, the eldest of his sons, and on a time the friend of Fingon, ere Morgoth's lies came between, spoke to Fëanor, saying, "Now what ships and roers will you spare to return? And whom shall they bear hither first? Fingon the valiant." Fëanor considered all those he had left behind as needless baggage, setting fire to the ships while his son watched. Fingon and many others were then left to cross the grinding ice of Helcaraxë in the bitter north, a journey that took years and saw the death of many an elf, including the wife of future High King of the Noldor, Turgon, Elenwe. Fëanor's craven act not being forgotten by those who had marched with his kin to join him in Middle-earth, further dividing the elves who had abandoned Valinor. Fëanor's impatience meant that Fingon arrived in Middle-earth after he had already been killed in the second battle of Beleriand, Dagor Nuin Gileath, the battle under stars. Following the death of Fëanor, an embassy came to his sons from Morgoth, acknowledging defeat, offering terms, claiming to even surrender one of the 3 Silmarils back to them. Maethros feigned to treat with Morgoth, meeting the emissaries of the Dark Lord. Both sides arrived with a greater force than agreed, but Morgoth sent the more. Maethros was ambushed, his entire company killed. He was then taken alive to the citadel of Angband. With the eldest son being held as a hostage, the Dark Lord bade the sons of Fëanor abandon their war, return west or depart to the south of the world, away from Morgoth's domain. Knowing that Morgoth would not release Maethros, they were unable to forsake the war due to the infamous oath they swore with their father Fëanor. They would not for any cause forsake the war against their enemy, in pursuit of the Silmarils. Therefore, Morgoth took Maethros and hung him from the face of a precipice upon Thangorodrim, and he was caught to the rock by the wrist of his right hand in a band of steel.
Then Fingon the Valiant, son of Fingolfin, resolved to heal the feud that divided the Noldor, before their enemies should be ready for war, for the earth trembled in the Northlands with the thunder of the forges of Morgoth underground. Long before, in the bliss of Valinor, before Melkor was unchained, or lies came between them, Fingon had been close in friendship with Maethros, and though he knew not yet that Maethros had not forgotten him at the burning of the ships, the thought of their ancient friendship stung his heart. Therefore he dared a deed which is justly renowned among the feats of the princes of the Noldor. Alone, and without the counsel of any, he set forth in search of Maethros, and aided by the very darkness that Morgoth had made, he came unseen into the fastness of his foes. High upon the shoulders of Thangorodrim he climbed, and looked in despair upon the desolation of the land. But no passage or crevice could he find through which he might come within Morgoth's stronghold. Then, in defiance of the orcs, who cowered still in the dark vaults beneath the earth, he took his harp and sang a song of Valinor that the Noldor made of old. Before strife was born among the sons of Finwë, and his voice rang in the mournful hollows that had never heard before aught save cries of fear and woe. Thus, Fingon found what he sought, for suddenly above him, far and faint, his song was taken up, and a voice answering called to him. Maethros it was that sang amid his torment.
By this deed, Fingon won great renown, and all the Noldor praised him, no matter the division that existed between them. Much can be said about this act and what it meant for the Noldor, Middle-earth, and resistance against Morgoth. I will discuss that in a moment, but I should first heap praise upon Fingon for doing what the sons of Fëanor could not do, seek to save their eldest brother Maethros. Not for his own honour or glory, but to heal the hurts of their houses, to unite the Noldor against the far greater foe, Morgoth. An attempt to save another at the great risk of his own life, never forgetting the ancient friendship that Tolkien says stung his heart. Without counsel, he approached the dark land of Morgoth, the towering peaks of Thangorodrim, the mountains of oppression and tyranny. Approaching such a land of desolation and darkness is worthy of a song in its own right, but to save a friend is worthy of an even greater honour. Where Fëanor thought that his own deeds in Middle-earth would be the matter of song until the last days of Arda, such a thing was true for Fingon, without him seeking such an honour. A real hero, selfless and courageous. With the rescue of his friend, Fingon and Maethros sought to heal the hurts of the Noldor together. Maethros did not seek kingship of the Noldor, which he could claim, and it fell rightly to Fingolfin. Things started to look good for the Noldor following this act, with a victory against Morgoth in the Glorious Battle, or Dagor Aglareb, the third battle of the Wars of Beleriand. Armies led by Fingolfin and Maethros, now united, were prepared for an attack by Morgoth, and they caught his forces from the east and the west. All this leading to the siege of Angband, which lasted 400 years, and brought a relative peace to most of Beleriand, as Morgoth's forces were held at bay. These 400 years of so-called peace would not have been possible without Fingon's actions. This peace, though long in the lives of men, was still too brief for elves. Unfortunately, time was also on the side of Morgoth, and from his impenetrable fortress of Angband, he broke the siege through a new monstrosity he had spent years devising: Glaurung, the father of dragons. In the year 455 of the First Age, Angband suddenly burst to life, and rivers of fire scorched the green plains of Ardgallen, becoming a barren land called Anfauglith. This was the Dagor Bragolach, Battle of Sudden Flame, with Glaurung leading armies of orcs and balrogs against elves and men. A massive destructive force bursting from the depths of Angband. The death of Fingolfin at the hands of Morgoth at Angband's gates gave Fingon the high kingship, but it would be short-lived. A renewed friendship with Maethros, brought about by the heroic journey to Thangorodrim all those years ago, led to the union of Maethros against Morgoth. An alliance led by Fingon from the west and Maethros from the east. This led to the fifth battle in the Wars of Beleriand, a battle of sorrow called the Nirnaeth Arnoediad, Battle of Unnumbered Tears. At last, Fingon stood alone, with his guard dead about him, and he fought with Gothmog, until another Balrog came behind and cast a thong of fire about him. Then Gothmog hewed him with his black axe, and a white flame sprang up from the helm of Fingon as it was cloven. Thus fell the High King of the Noldor, and they beat him into the dust with their maces, and his banner, blue and silver, they trod into the mire of his blood. Treachery led to the most grievous of defeats for the elves, and the end of a short reign for Fingon as High King of the Noldor. The army of Mithras had been delayed by the betrayal of Uldor the Accursed, son of Ulfang the Easterling, servant of Morgoth. In the fifth battle, the elves were betrayed, and the late arrival of Fingon's friend Mithras was not enough to save himself or stop a victory for Morgoth. The Union was disbanded. Húrin the Strong was captured and tortured by Morgoth. Easterlings invaded, and the sons of Fëanor retreated to Assyriand in the east. Orcs gathered the slain and built a great mound of elves and men, a reminder of their destruction and Morgoth's victory, a symbol of treachery and death called the Hill of Tears, giving Morgoth dominance in the north of Beleriand. Despite the horror that unfolded and the death of Fingon, we must not forget what Fingon had achieved. The prince and king, risking death to save a friend, risking everything to make amends for the acts of others that led to the breaking of bonds of friendship between great houses of the elves. Morgoth was the one he hated, and Fingon is rightly praised in song for his deeds, for what he boldly attempted. Describing the heroism of Fingon is an easy task. Being separated from Mithras, he stood alone against a Balrog, then being assailed by yet another Balrog. His death is not glorious, but brutal, a representation of the sorrow and tragedy of the Silmarillion. But through that sorrow, Fingon is renowned, remembered for all time as many songs are sung and many tales are told by the elves of the Nirnaeth Arnoediad, the battle of unnumbered tears, in which Fingon fell and the flower of the Eldar withered. Yet unlike Fingolfin, we don't remember Fingon for standing face to face with a dark tyrant on behalf of his people, or for falling in battle against Balrogs in defence of others. Fingon is remembered for remarkable courage against pain of death in the blackest of places in Arda, where others would fear to tread, for seeking out a friend, a loved one, alone, for thinking of uniting people against the greatest threat to their existence in the world, and taking steps to make that happen, making Fingon the Valiant one of the greatest heroes of the First Age, and all ages of Arda. Thank you for watching. On previous videos in this series, people have asked if I'll be doing videos on heroes of the Second and Third Ages, and the answer is yes. Once I have covered the First Age, I will definitely be moving on to the Second. I still have some very notable figures to cover first. If you enjoyed this video and the work I do in my channel and want to help support, please consider taking a look at my Patreon page. I have linked in the description. You can also help this channel grow by subscribing if you haven't already. It really does help, and I appreciate it greatly. Thanks again, and I hope you'll return for the next chapter of the Red Book.